August 7th, 1967. That's the date you need to remember. Because on that morning, in the red clay hills of Vietnam, one Marine sergeant did something that should have gotten him court-martialed, but instead, it changed everything. Before we go any further, do me a favor. Grab your coffee, settle in, because what I'm about to tell you, it's not some Hollywood version of war. This is real, every word of it. And by the end, you're going to understand why 2,000 Marines are alive today because one man refused to follow the rules. Now, if you find this kind of history fascinating, hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this, the ones they don't teach in school, the ones that show you what real courage looks like, that's what we do here. All right, let's go back. The problem was simple, brutal even. North Vietnamese snipers were killing Marines from distances that seemed impossible. They'd set up on ridge lines, in tree lines, positioned so far away that by the time you heard the shot, someone was already bleeding out in the dirt. And here's the thing, American rifles couldn't shoot back, not effectively. The enemy was using Russian-made Dragunov SVD sniper rifles, purpose-built weapons that could reach out to 800 meters, sometimes more. Meanwhile, our Marines were carrying M14 rifles, solid weapons, reliable, but with an effective range of maybe 500 meters. That's a 300-meter gap, 3 football fields where the enemy could shoot at you, and all you could do was watch through your scope and call for artillery. You understand what that does to a man? Watching your brothers get picked off, knowing you're trained to shoot, you've got a rifle in your hands, but you can't help them because your weapon just won't reach? Between January and June of 1967, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines lost 17 men to enemy snipers. 17 Marines who died because the math didn't add up, because enemy rifles could shoot farther than ours. The Corps knew about the problem. Of course they did. They requested better weapons, specialized equipment. But you know how military bureaucracy works. Everything takes time. Requisition forms, supply chains, priorities. Meanwhile, every day, Marines were dying. That's where Mitchell Townsend comes in. Now, Townsend wasn't supposed to be a sniper, not officially. See, he was born in Greenwood, Mississippi in 1944. Black kid in the Deep South, 3rd of 5 children in a sharecropping family. His father had served in World War II, came home with medals and stories, but also came home to the same segregated Mississippi he'd left. Still, his father taught him something important, taught him to shoot. By the time he was 8 years old, he could hit targets that grown men couldn't see. His father recognized that gift, knew it was dangerous in some ways. A black boy in Mississippi, known for being able to shoot better than white folks, that could bring trouble. But his father also told him something that Mitchell never forgot. God gives gifts for a reason. Don't you dare hide yours. Mitchell excelled at math, physics, had a mind that understood how things worked, why bullets traveled the way they did, what made one rifle more accurate than another. His high school teacher, Mrs. Eleanor Jackson, gave him advanced textbooks, stuff the colored schools weren't supposed to have. She saw something in him. And in 1963, when President Kennedy pushed for integration of the armed forces, Mitchell saw his opportunity. He enlisted in the Marine Corps. Paris Island in 1963 was hell for any recruit, but for the few black Marines in Mitchell's platoon, it was something else entirely. Drill instructors who looked at you like you didn't belong, fellow recruits who made it clear you weren't welcome. But then came weapons qualification day. The instructor tried to take the rifle away from Mitchell before he even fired a shot, made some comment about being sure which end the bullet came out of. Mitchell just asked for his ammunition and a chance to shoot. He hit 48 out of 50 targets, at ranges where other recruits were struggling just to see the silhouettes. The snickering stopped that day. His drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Raymond Wilkins, pulled him aside afterward, told him straight, "Sergeant, I don't care if you're purple with yellow polka dots. You shoot like that, you got a future in my Corps." But here's the reality. Even though Mitchell could outshoot almost anyone, The path to becoming a scout sniper remained mostly closed to black Marines in 1963. So he served in regular infantry, did his first enlistment, and when it ended in 1966, he re-enlisted specifically because of Vietnam. He had no idea what was coming. By July 1967, Mitchell Townsend was a sergeant assigned to 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, and because of personnel shortages, combat losses, they temporarily attached him to the Scout Sniper Platoon, not because he was officially trained as a sniper, but because they needed every capable shooter they could get. The platoon leader, Staff Sergeant Walter Cunningham, made his feelings clear from the start. "I don't care what your qualification scores are, Townsend. Scout snipers train together, fight together. You're here because I'm short-handed, not because you belong." Mitchell was paired with Lance Corporal Franklin Riley. Good kid from Oregon, nervous disposition, earned the nickname Jumpy. His last partner had caught a round through the scope 3 weeks earlier, so Riley wasn't exactly thrilled about getting close to another sniper. But here's what happened that changed everything. During their second mission together, they watched an Alpha Company patrol move through a valley about 700 meters from their position. Suddenly, shots rang out. 2 Marines fell immediately. Then, 3 more. Riley spotted them through his scope. "Target, 11 o'clock, approximately 900 meters. NVA sniper team, at least 2 of them." Mitchell brought his rifle to bear, but both men knew the truth. The enemy was too far away, way beyond the effective range of an M14. So they did the only thing they could, radioed for artillery support. It took 17 minutes for the artillery to arrive. By then, the NVA snipers had relocated. 5 Marines died that day. 5 men that Mitchell and Riley watched through their scopes, but couldn't help. That night changed something in Mitchell Townsend. While the rest of the platoon played cards or wrote letters home, Mitchell sat in a corner of the outpost, cleaning his rifle. But he wasn't just cleaning it, he was studying it, thinking. See, Mitchell had something most infantry sergeants didn't. He understood the physics, the ballistics, how gas pressure worked, how bullet velocity was generated. Thanks to those advanced textbooks his teacher had given him years ago, he understood it at a level that went beyond just knowing how to shoot. The M14 used a gas-operated system. When you fired, some of the expanding gas from the cartridge was bled off through a small port in the barrel. That gas cycled the action, ejected the spent casing, chambered a new round. The system was calibrated for reliability, making sure the rifle would function in mud, dust, rain, whatever. But Mitchell had a theory. What if you restricted that gas port, kept more of the pressure behind the bullet instead of bleeding it off to cycle the action? More pressure meant more velocity. More velocity meant more range. It was simple physics. The Dragunov wasn't magic. It was just engineered differently. The next morning, Mitchell found Corporal Dennis Martinez, a supply clerk who could get things that weren't officially available. "I need copper wire, about 16 gauge, and I need it quiet." "What's it worth to you?" "My next 3 packs of cigarettes." Martinez smirked. "Make it 5, and I don't tell anyone about those PX items that keep finding their way to the Vietnamese village down the road." Mitchell had noticed Martinez's little side business. 4, and I keep noticing things without saying anything." "Deal." That evening, Martinez delivered a small coil of copper wire. Cost 75 cents at the base exchange. While everyone else slept, Mitchell modified his rifle. He wrapped the copper wire around the gas system, creating a crude regulator that restricted the amount of gas being bled off. More energy stayed behind the bullet. Simple, elegant, and completely against regulations. Lance Corporal Riley walked up while Mitchell was reassembling the rifle. Watched him for a moment. "What are you doing to that rifle, Sarge?" Mitchell could have lied, but if this worked, Riley would see it. If it failed, Riley would be affected by that failure. "I'm changing the rules, Riley. The Dragunov has range because it's designed to push that bullet faster and farther. Our M14s can do the same if we help them a little. Riley's eyes went wide. That's against regulations. They'll bust you back to private. Only if it doesn't work. If it works, they'll be too busy giving me medals to worry about regulations. You're crazy, you know that? Mitchell smiled for the first time since joining the platoon. That's what spotters are for, isn't it? Neither of them knew that in less than 12 hours, they'd be putting that modification to the ultimate test. The pre-dawn briefing on August 7th was tense. Intelligence reported heavy NVA movement in the valley below Combat Outpost Eagle. Elements of the 7th Marine Regiment were moving through that area to reinforce positions along Highway 9. About 2,000 Marines would be transiting through that valley over the next 48 hours. Staff Sergeant Cunningham assigned positions. Townsend, Riley, you'll take Observation Post 3 on the eastern ridge. Standard protocol. Observe and report. Do not engage unless directly threatened or specifically authorized. Mitchell nodded, feeling the weight of his modified M14 across his back. Riley shot him a nervous glance. They departed the outpost at 0430 hours. 3-kilometer hike through wet underbrush. They needed to be in position before first light. Are you actually going to use that thing? Riley whispered as they climbed. If I have to. And if it doesn't work? Mitchell paused, considering the question. I guess I'll have died trying something, instead of watching more Marines die while following orders. Riley didn't say anything after that. They reached Observation Post 3 just as dawn broke. The position was just a shallow depression reinforced with sandbags, but it offered a clear view of the valley and the trails feeding into it from the north. The morning passed quietly. They observed local farmers, logged movements, maintained their watch. By midday, the first elements of the 7th Marines began appearing, small columns moving cautiously toward their designated positions. Riley radioed in. Command, this is Sierra 3. We have friendlies entering the valley from the south. No sign of enemy activity in our sector. Over. Sierra 3, command. Acknowledged. Maintain observation. Out. More Marine units moved into the valley as the afternoon wore on. Mitchell estimated nearly 500 men were visible from their position, with more arriving every hour. At 1438 hours, everything changed. Movement, North Ridge, 2 o'clock, Riley said suddenly, his voice tight. Multiple figures moving into position. Mitchell swung his scope to the indicated position. Through the magnified optics, he could see them clearly. At least 6 NVA soldiers establishing what looked like crew-served weapon positions, and among them, 2 carrying the distinctive profiles of Dragunov SVD rifles. Range? Mitchell asked. Riley checked his rangefinder and map. 820 meters to the nearest, 850 to the ridge position. Well beyond the effective range of a standard M14, exactly as Mitchell had feared. Command, this is Sierra 3, Riley radioed. We have visual on enemy force establishing positions on North Ridge, approximately 6 to 8 individuals, including sniper teams. Request permission to engage. Over. The radio crackled. Sierra 3, negative on engagement. Range is beyond your capability. We're scrambling air support. Maintain observation and provide updates. Out. Riley looked at Mitchell, frustration clear on his face. Air support is at least 20 minutes out. Those Marines in the valley, they're walking into a killing zone. Through his scope, Mitchell watched as the NVA snipers completed their setup. One was already in firing position, weapon trained on the valley below. They had a clear shot at hundreds of exposed Marines who had no idea of the threat above them. The moment of decision had arrived. Mitchell shifted his position, settling his modified M14 onto the sandbag rest. His mind raced through calculations. Distance, elevation, wind speed, the estimated effect of his modification on the bullet's velocity. All theoretical until now. What are you doing, Sarge? Command said no engagement. They said no engagement because they think we can't hit them from here, Mitchell replied, his voice calm as he adjusted his scope. They don't know what this rifle can do now. And neither do you, Sarge. This is crazy. Then I better make the first one count. Mitchell settled his breathing. 4 seconds in, hold for 2. 4 seconds out, hold for 2. His heartbeat slowed. The world narrowed to the view through his scope, centered on the lead NVA sniper nearly half a mile away. Final adjustments for elevation and windage. Significant holdover to compensate for the extreme distance. Then, between heartbeats, he squeezed the trigger. The modified M14 roared with a sound noticeably different from its normal report. Sharper, with a distinct ping as the restricted gas system forced more pressure behind the bullet. The recoil was heavier, slamming into his shoulder. Through the scope, he watched as the NVA sniper suddenly jerked backward, then collapsed over his rifle. A hit, at 820 meters, with an M14 rifle that every manual said couldn't reach that far. For a moment, Riley was speechless, then training took over. Hit, target down, shift fire, second sniper, moving to cover, 10 meters right of original position. Mitchell worked the action, chambering a new round. The spent casing arced away. The bolt felt stiffer than normal, just as he had anticipated. He acquired his second target. Fired again. Another hit. The second NVA sniper fell. The remaining NVA soldiers scrambled for cover, clearly shocked by fire coming from a distance they thought was safe. "Command, this is Sierra 3, Riley was on the radio, his voice electric with excitement. "We have engaged enemy positions. 3 confirmed hits. Enemy snipers neutralized. Request permission to continue engagement. Over." The radio exploded with questions and demands for clarification, but Mitchell wasn't listening. He was focused on the remaining NVA soldiers who were now firing blindly in their general direction while attempting to retreat. "Third target, moving left to right, carrying radio equipment, 840 meters. Mitchell tracked the running figure, led him slightly, and fired again. The radio man fell. 4 shots, 4 hits, at distances that should have been impossible with his weapon. The remaining NVA soldiers disappeared from the ridge, abandoning their positions in the face of inexplicable long-range fire. In the valley below, the Marine columns continued their movement, completely unaware of the threat that had been eliminated above them. "Command wants us back at the OP immediately," Riley said, finally ending his radio conversation. "And Captain Morrison is personally coming to debrief us. And Sarge, he doesn't sound happy." Mitchell nodded, carefully wiping down his rifle before slinging it. The gas system was hot to the touch, even through his gloves. Carbon buildup was already affecting the action. His modification had worked, but at a cost to the weapon's reliability. A few more shots, and the rifle might fail completely. "Did you tell them about the hits?" Mitchell asked. "Yeah, they didn't believe me. Said it's not possible to hit targets at that range with an M14. "Did you tell them about the modification?" Riley hesitated. "No, figured that was your story to tell. Besides, they'll see it soon enough." As they gathered their equipment, Mitchell took one last look at the North Ridge, then down at the valley where hundreds of Marines continued their movement, oblivious to how close they'd come to disaster. "What happens now?" Riley asked. "Now," Mitchell replied, "I either get a court-martial or a medal. Maybe both." The return to combat outpost Eagle was tense. Word of the engagement had spread quickly. Staff Sergeant Cunningham intercepted them before they could enter the command bunker. "What the hell happened out there, Townsend? Command says you engaged targets at over 800 meters with an M14. That's not possible." Mitchell met his gaze steadily. "With all due respect, Staff Sergeant, it is possible. I just did it. Do you want to see my rifle?" Without hesitation, Mitchell unslung his M14 and handed it over. Cunningham immediately noticed the copper wire wrapped around the gas system. His expression darkened. "You modified a service weapon without authorization, Do you have any idea how many regulations you violated? Before Mitchell could respond, Captain Morrison emerged from the command bunker. Inside, both of you, now. The debriefing that followed was unlike anything either Marine had experienced. Morrison, along with Major Thomas Bradford, the battalion executive officer, questioned them relentlessly about every detail of the engagement. Riley's spotting log was examined. Distances were verified against maps. Mitchell's modified rifle was inspected by the battalion armorer. "Explain exactly what you did to this weapon, Sergeant," Major Bradford finally said, his tone neutral. Mitchell laid it out in precise technical language, how restricting the gas system increased the pressure behind the bullet, extending its range and velocity, the trade-offs in reliability, the need for more frequent cleaning. "And you developed this modification on your own?" Captain Morrison asked skeptically. "Yes, sir. Based on my understanding of internal ballistics and observations of the Dragunov performance." The officers exchanged glances. Bradford leaned forward. "Do you realize that your unauthorized actions directly violated at least 7 different regulations regarding the handling and maintenance of service weapons?" "Yes, sir." "And do you also realize that your actions quite possibly saved the lives of hundreds of Marines in that valley today?" Mitchell blinked, caught off guard. I hope they would, sir." Bradford sat back. "A patrol sent to the North Ridge after your engagement confirmed 4 enemy KIA, including 2 equipped with Dragunov rifles. Based on their position and the movement in the valley, intelligence estimates they could have inflicted significant casualties on our forces." For the first time, the magnitude of what he'd accomplished began to sink in. "Here's our problem, Sergeant," Morrison continued. "We can't officially condone the unauthorized modification of service weapons. That would create chaos. But we also can't ignore a potentially valuable tactical innovation, especially one that addresses a specific threat our forces are facing." Major Bradford picked up the modified M14, examining the copper wire closely. "How reproducible is this modification? Could you train others to apply it correctly?" "Yes, sir. It's not complicated, but there are refinements that could make it more reliable, with proper materials and testing." Bradford nodded. "Captain, I think we need to involve battalion R&D in this." Morrison agreed. "Sergeant Townsend, effective immediately, you are temporarily assigned to the battalion research and development team. You will work with our armorers to refine your modification and develop a standardized procedure for its application. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Mitchell replied, stunned. "As for the matter of your unauthorized actions, there will be an official reprimand in your file. Unofficially, however, I expect you'll find that reprimand carries very little weight in future considerations." Over the next 3 weeks, Mitchell worked closely with the battalion's armory section and visiting weapons specialists from division headquarters. His crude copper wire modification evolved into a precisely machined gas regulator that could be easily installed and removed as needed. Testing confirmed what Mitchell had demonstrated in combat. Properly modified M14 rifles could indeed engage targets effectively at ranges approaching 900 meters under ideal conditions, rivaling the performance of the enemy's Dragunov SVDs. By early September, the first officially sanctioned range extension kits were being distributed to sniper teams throughout the 1st and 3rd Marine Divisions. The accompanying technical manual credited field innovations by combat personnel for the development. No mention of Sergeant Townsend by name. This deliberate anonymity wasn't lost on Mitchell, but it didn't bother him. As a black NCO in 1967, he understood the complex politics involved. What mattered was that Marine snipers now had a tool to counter the enemy's advantage, a tool that would save countless lives. On September 23, 1967, during Operation Medina, the practical impact of Mitchell's innovation was dramatically demonstrated. As elements of the 1st Marines pushed into the Hailang Forest, they encountered heavy enemy sniper fire from concealed positions. Marine sniper teams equipped with the modified M14 rifles were able to engage and neutralize these threats at ranges previously considered beyond their capability. Colonel Marcus Williams, commanding officer of the 1st Marines, noted in his after-action report, "Our ability to counter enemy sniper fire at extended ranges directly contributed to the operation's success and significantly reduced our casualties." By the end of 1967, intelligence reports indicated that NVA units in Quang Tri Province had altered their tactics. They were no longer relying on the superior range of their Dragunov rifles to engage American forces with impunity. The psychological advantage they'd exploited for months had evaporated, all because of a 75-cent modification conceived by a sergeant who refused to accept that the problem couldn't be solved. An analysis conducted by 3rd Marine Division Headquarters in November 1967 estimated that the range extension modification had directly contributed to preventing approximately 2,000 casualties among Marine units operating in Quang Tri Province. 2,000 Marines, sons, fathers, brothers, husbands, alive because one man decided that following orders was less important than saving lives. For Sergeant Mitchell Townsend, the aftermath brought mixed consequences. The official reprimand remained in his service record, but alongside it appeared a Navy Achievement Medal with Combat V for technical innovation under combat conditions, carefully worded to avoid explicitly mentioning the unauthorized modification that had precipitated the award. In October 1967, Mitchell was offered the opportunity to attend Scout Sniper School at Camp Pendleton upon completion of his Vietnam tour, an acknowledgement of his contributions that would have been unthinkable months earlier. He accepted, becoming one of the first Black Marines to receive formal sniper training. "I never set out to change policy or make history. I just couldn't stand watching more Marines die because our rifles couldn't reach far enough. Sometimes solving the problem in front of you is more important than following every rule in the book." Lance Corporal Franklin Riley, who had witnessed Mitchell's innovation firsthand, carried that lesson throughout his own military career. Rising eventually to the rank of Master Gunnery Sergeant, Riley became an influential voice in Marine Corps weapons development programs in the 1980s. "Sergeant Townsend taught me that sometimes the best solutions come from the Marines who are actually facing the problem. That lesson shaped how I approached every challenge for the next 25 years, Riley stated in a 1992 interview. The Townsend modification, as it became unofficially known among snipers, despite never bearing his name in any official documentation, remained in use through the remainder of American involvement in Vietnam. Its principles would later influence the development of more sophisticated sniper systems, including adjustable gas regulators that became standard features on many precision rifles. Mitchell Townsend completed his second tour in Vietnam in February 1968, just as the Tet Offensive was underway. He returned to the United States, attended Scout Sniper School as promised, and graduated second in his class, despite the lingering prejudices of the era. He served as a sniper instructor at Quantico for 2 years before leaving the Marine Corps in 1971. Like many Vietnam veterans, especially those of color, Mitchell returned to a nation still struggling with its identity and its feelings about the war. The recognition he'd earned among fellow Marines meant little in civilian life, and the technical innovation that had saved thousands of lives remained largely unknown outside military circles. Mitchell returned to Mississippi briefly before settling in Atlanta, Georgia. He used the mechanical aptitude that had served him so well in combat to build a successful career as an automotive engineer with General Motors. He married Elena Jenkins, a schoolteacher, in 1973. They raised 3 children together. For decades, Mitchell rarely spoke about his military service, let alone his specific contribution to Marine Corps combat effectiveness. The story might have remained buried if not for a chance encounter at a Vietnam veterans gathering in Atlanta in 1989. Colonel Walter Cunningham, long since retired from the Marine Corps, recognized Mitchell immediately, despite the 22 years that had passed since they'd served together. "You're the wireman," Cunningham said, extending his hand, "the sergeant who figured out how to make our rifles outshoot the Dragunovs." Mitchell was stunned that Cunningham remembered him, let alone his modification. "That was a long time ago, Colonel." "Not so long that I've forgotten. Do you have any idea how many Marines are alive today because of what you did?" That conversation led to Mitchell's story finally emerging into public view. Cunningham, now a military historian, documented the development of the range extension modification and its impact on operations in Quang Tri Province. His paper, published in the United States Naval Institute Proceedings in 1991, finally gave Mitchell the recognition that official channels had been reluctant to provide during the war. The paper caught the attention of the Marine Corps History Division, which conducted extensive interviews with Mitchell and others involved in the development and implementation of the modification. These interviews formed the basis for a case study on field innovation that became required reading for officers attending the Marine Corps Command and Staff College. Major General Franklin Riley, retired, once the nervous young lance corporal who had spotted for Mitchell on that fateful day in August 1967, summarized the legacy in the foreword to Cunningham's later book on Marine Corps snipers in Vietnam. Sergeant Townsend's 75-cent solution to a million-dollar problem exemplifies the best traditions of Marine Corps innovation. Faced with a tactical challenge that was costing lives, he applied his knowledge, skill, and initiative to develop a solution when none was forthcoming through official channels. His willingness to risk his career to save his fellow Marines represents the highest ideals of the Corps. In 1997, 30 years after his unauthorized modification changed the course of combat in Quang Tri Province, Mitchell Townsend was invited to the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico as a guest of honor. There, before an assembly of sniper instructors and students, he was presented with a plaque commemorating his contribution to Marine Corps sniper doctrine. The plaque, which now hangs in the school's Hall of Innovations, bears a simple inscription beneath a mounted copper wire similar to the one Mitchell had used. "Sometimes courage means knowing when not to follow orders. Sergeant Mitchell Townsend, USMC, August 7, 1967. During the ceremony, Brigadier General Howard Matthews remarked, "The Marine Corps has always prided itself in developing warriors who can think independently and act decisively when circumstances demand it. Sergeant Townsend exemplified these qualities when he recognized a problem that was costing Marines their lives and found a solution that official channels had not found. His story reminds us that innovation often comes from unexpected sources and that we must remain open to good ideas regardless of where or whom they come from." Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, who served as commanding officer of the Scout Sniper Instructor School from 1995 to 1998, made this point explicitly in a 2002 interview. "We teach Townsend's story not just for its historical significance, but because it embodies a principle we want every Marine to internalize, that they are empowered to solve problems, even when doing so requires questioning established doctrine or procedures." This legacy of empowered innovation would prove particularly valuable during the counterinsurgency operations in Iraq and Afghanistan in the early 21st century, where conventional military doctrine often proved inadequate to the complex challenges faced by American forces. The spirit of Mitchell's 75-cent solution would live on in countless field modifications, tactical adaptations, and procedural innovations developed by a new generation of Marines. The specific modification that Mitchell pioneered, restricting the gas system to increase muzzle velocity and effective range, would reappear in various forms throughout subsequent decades. Modern precision rifles often incorporate adjustable gas blocks that allow shooters to fine-tune the system for optimal performance with specific ammunition or operating conditions. A sophisticated implementation of the principle Mitchell had applied with simple copper wire in 1967. Mitchell Townsend passed away on June 12, 2011, at the age of 67 after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer. His funeral in Atlanta was attended by hundreds of Marines from multiple generations, including retired Major General Franklin Riley and several former members of the Scout Sniper Platoon with whom he'd served in Vietnam. In his eulogy, General Riley spoke of the man who had changed his life and the lives of countless others. Mitchell Townsend never sought recognition or acclaim. He saw a problem that was costing Marine lives, and he fixed it. When I asked him once why he risked his career on an unauthorized modification that might not have worked, he told me something I've never forgotten. He said, "In combat, being right is more important than being authorized." That wisdom saved thousands of lives, and it's a lesson every leader should take to heart. After Mitchell's death, his family donated his Navy Achievement Medal and the original prototype of his gas system modification to the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. These items are now displayed in the Vietnam War Gallery, alongside a brief account of how a black sergeant from Mississippi changed Marine Corps sniper doctrine with 75 cents worth of copper wire. The story of Mitchell Townsend illuminates a truth often overlooked in military history, that some of the most consequential innovations arise not from official research and development programs, but from the initiative and ingenuity of individual service members faced with immediate life-or-death challenges. In the hills of Quang Tri Province on August 7, 1967, Sergeant Townsend faced such a challenge. The established doctrine and equipment were inadequate. Official solutions were not forthcoming quickly enough to save the Marines moving through the valley below. Rather than accepting these limitations, he applied his understanding of physics and ballistics to create a solution that official channels had failed to provide. In doing so, he demonstrated a form of courage different from, but no less valuable than, the physical bravery typically celebrated in military narratives. It required the moral courage to risk his career and reputation on an unproven idea, driven by the conviction that saving his fellow Marines was more important than adhering to regulations that were costing lives. This tension between following established procedures and adapting to overcome immediate challenges is one that military organizations have grappled with throughout history. Rigid adherence to doctrine provides consistency and predictability, but can lead to catastrophic failure when circumstances outpace institutional adaptation. Conversely, unbounded innovation risks chaos and the breakdown of necessary standardization. Mitchell's story offers a middle path: innovation driven by necessity, guided by expertise, and ultimately validated and institutionalized through proper channels. His initial unauthorized action was followed by systematic testing, refinement, and official adoption of the principles he demonstrated, creating a virtuous cycle of bottom-up innovation and top-down implementation. This pattern, field innovation followed by institutional adaptation, has characterized many of the most successful military organizations throughout history. The Marine Corps' embrace of Mitchell's innovation, despite its unauthorized origins, reflects an institutional culture that values effectiveness over rigid adherence to procedure when lives are at stake. For today's military leaders and organizations, Mitchell's 75-cent solution offers several enduring lessons. First, frontline personnel often possess unique insights into tactical problems that may not be visible to higher echelons. Second, Creating pathways for these insights to inform institutional practice is essential for adaptation in rapidly changing operational environments. And third, the courage to innovate in the face of bureaucratic resistance is as vital on the modern battlefield as physical bravery. As we reflect on Sergeant Mitchell Townsend's legacy, we might ask ourselves, would we have the courage to break the rules when lives depended on it? Would we recognize the solution that others had missed? And would our organizations have the wisdom to embrace innovation, even when it comes from unexpected sources? In an era of increasingly complex security challenges and rapidly evolving technology, these questions remain as relevant today as they were in the hills of Quang Tri Province over half a century ago. The 75-cent solution that saved 2,000 Marines reminds us that sometimes the most valuable innovations are not those that cost the most or come from the most prestigious sources, but those born of necessity, ingenuity, and the moral courage to act when others will not. Mitchell Townsend never asked to be a hero. He never sought recognition for what he did. In fact, for most of his life after Vietnam, he remained silent about his contribution to Marine Corps history. He went to work every day at General Motors, he coached his kids' baseball teams, he attended church on Sundays. He lived a quiet life. But every Marine who came home from Vietnam after August 77 because enemy snipers could no longer pick them off with impunity, they owed their lives, in part, to a black sergeant from Mississippi who decided that 75 cents worth of copper wire was worth risking his entire career. Every Marine who served in subsequent conflicts, benefiting from the improved sniper systems that incorporated Mitchell's principles, they carried his legacy with them, whether they knew his name or not. You see, that's the thing about real courage. It's not always loud. It's not always recognized. Sometimes it happens in the quiet moments. A sergeant sitting alone in a corner of an outpost, wrapping wire around a rifle, knowing that what he's doing could end his career, but doing it anyway because he can't watch one more Marine die. Sometimes courage looks like a young black man in 1963, enlisting in the Marine Corps during a time when much of America still didn't believe he belonged there, proving himself not with words but with every shot he fired, every target he hit, every life he saved. Sometimes courage looks like being right when everyone in authority tells you you're wrong and having the conviction to prove it, even if it means breaking the rules. There's a lesson in Mitchell's story that goes beyond military tactics or weapon modifications. It's about what happens when you tell someone they can't do something and they find a way to do it anyway. It's about what happens when systems fail the people they're supposed to protect, and individuals step up to fix those systems, even at great personal risk. It's about the quiet dignity of a man who changed the course of a war, saved thousands of lives, and then went home and lived the rest of his days without ever demanding the recognition he deserved. Because that's who Mitchell Townsend was. Not someone who sought glory, not someone who wanted his name in history books, just a Marine who saw a problem, understood the solution, and had the courage to act on it. In 2011, when Mitchell passed away, the Marines who attended his funeral weren't there because of what he'd done for the Corps as an institution. They were there because of what he represented. He represented the Marines who never get their names on monuments, the ones who solve problems in the field while headquarters is still filing paperwork, the ones who save lives not through grand gestures, but through knowledge, skill, and the willingness to take risks that others won't. He represented every service member who's ever been told their idea wouldn't work, their solution was too simple, their background made them unqualified to have the answer, and proved everyone wrong. He represented the truth that excellence, real excellence, can come from anywhere, from anyone, if we're willing to recognize it. Today, if you visit the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, you can see Mitchell's Navy Achievement Medal. You can see the original prototype of his gas system modification, that crude copper wire that changed everything. 75 cents worth of material, but the value, immeasurable. Next to the display, there's a quote from General Riley. In combat, being right is more important than being authorized. 6,000 Marines who might have died in the fall of 1967 came home instead. They raised families, built careers, lived full lives. How many grandchildren exist today because of Mitchell Townsend's 75-cent solution? How many great-grandchildren? How do you measure the value of that? You can't. Not in dollars, not in medals, not in words. You can only remember. You can only ensure that stories like Mitchell's don't get lost in the footnotes of history. Because here's what troubles me, and maybe it should trouble you too. For decades, Mitchell Townsend's contribution remained virtually unknown, not because it wasn't significant, not because it didn't save lives, but because the systems that determine whose stories get told, whose contributions get recognized, those systems have always had blind spots. A black Marine sergeant in 1967, no matter how brilliant his innovation, no matter how many lives he saved, wasn't the kind of hero the official narrative was looking for. So his name was left off the technical manuals. His modification became Field Innovations by Combat Personnel, anonymous, faceless. It took a chance encounter 22 years later for his story to finally emerge. How many other Mitchell Townsends are there? How many other brilliant solutions, life-saving innovations, acts of moral courage have been lost because the people who performed them didn't fit the mold of what a hero was supposed to look like? That's why stories like this matter. Not just as history lessons, not just as interesting tales from a war that ended nearly 50 years ago, but as reminders that genius and courage come in forms we don't always expect, from places we don't always look. And if we're not careful, if we're not intentional about seeking out and preserving these stories, they disappear. Mitchell Townsend almost disappeared. His contribution almost became just another anonymous footnote. But Walter Cunningham remembered. Franklin Riley remembered. The Marines who served with him, who watched him work that magic with a rifle at distances that shouldn't have been possible, they remembered. And because they remembered, because they refused to let his story be forgotten, we know about him today. So what do we do with a story like this? We don't let it become another piece of trivia, another interesting fact to mention at dinner parties. We understand what it represents. It represents the power of individual initiative in the face of institutional inertia. It represents the value of technical expertise and deep understanding, even when that expertise comes from unexpected sources. It represents the moral courage required to break rules that are costing lives, even when breaking those rules could cost you everything you've worked for. And it represents something else, something that might be even more important. It represents the responsibility we all have to recognize excellence wherever we find it, to lift up contributions that systems might overlook, and to ensure that the Mitchell Townsends of the world get the recognition they deserve while they're still alive to receive it. Because here's the thing. Mitchell Townsend died in 2011. He got to see some recognition before the end. He got to visit Quantico, see his modification honored, hear the thanks of the Marines whose lives his innovation had saved. But for most of his life, he thought his contribution had been forgotten, buried under regulations and reluctance to acknowledge that a black NCO had solved a problem the entire military-industrial complex had failed to address. He went decades believing that what he'd done, one of the most consequential tactical innovations of the Vietnam War, didn't matter to anyone but him and the men he'd served with. That shouldn't happen. Not to Mitchell Townsend, not to anyone who puts their life on the line and uses their mind to save others. In the years since Mitchell's death, military academies have used his story as a teaching tool, not just to teach tactics or weapon modifications, but to teach leadership. They teach it to show young officers that sometimes the best ideas come from the lowest ranks, that listening to your sergeants, your corporals, your enlisted personnel, that's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom. They teach it to show that regulations exist to serve a purpose, but when regulations actively prevent you from saving lives, you have a moral obligation to question them. They teach it to show that innovation doesn't always require massive budgets or advanced laboratories. Sometimes it requires observation, understanding, and the courage to try something different. And increasingly, they teach it to show that diversity, real diversity, not just the kind that looks good in recruitment materials, that diversity of background, experience, and perspective is a tactical advantage. Mitchell Townsend saw a solution that others missed, in part because his life experience, his education, his path to the Marine Corps was different from the typical sniper of that era. That difference wasn't a liability. It was his greatest asset. Today, the principles Mitchell discovered with his 75-cent modification are built into some of the most advanced sniper systems in the world. Adjustable gas systems that allow precision shooters to optimize their weapons for specific conditions and ammunition types. They're standard on many platforms. The idea that you can modify gas pressure to improve ballistic performance, it's basic knowledge now, taught in every armorer's course. But it wasn't basic knowledge in 1967. It took a sergeant from Mississippi with a gift for shooting and an understanding of physics to see what everyone else had missed. And because he saw it, because he had the courage to act on it, because the Marine Corps had the wisdom to eventually embrace it, thousands of Marines came home alive. That's his legacy. Not the copper wire, not the modification itself. The lives, the families, the futures that existed because Mitchell Townsend decided that saving his fellow Marines was more important than following orders that didn't make sense anymore. So here we are, more than 50 years after August 7, 1967. More than 50 years since Sergeant Mitchell Townsend pressed his face against that rifle, aimed at a target nearly half a mile away, and proved that impossible was just a word people used when they'd stopped trying to find solutions. The question isn't whether his story is interesting. Of course it is. The question is, what do we do with it? Do we let it be another tale of military ingenuity that we appreciate for a moment and then forget? Or do we recognize it for what it really is? A reminder that the people closest to the problem often see the solutions most clearly. A reminder that courage takes many forms, and sometimes the most important courage is the willingness to be right when everyone in authority is wrong. A reminder that excellence can come from anywhere if we're willing to see it. And a reminder that every one of us, in whatever field we work, whatever challenges we face, we have the power to be like Mitchell Townsend, to see the problem that's costing people, to understand the solution even when others say it's impossible, and to have the courage to act even when acting means risking everything we've built. That's the real story here. Not just what Mitchell Townsend did, but what his example calls us to do. To question, to innovate, to refuse to accept that problems are unsolvable just because the official solutions haven't worked. To value knowledge and expertise wherever we find them. To have the moral courage to act on our convictions even when the rules say we shouldn't. And to ensure that the contributions of people like Mitchell, people whose innovations save lives, change outcomes, make the impossible possible, that those contributions are recognized, celebrated, and remembered. Not decades after the fact, not as footnotes in someone else's story, but in real time, with the full weight and gratitude they deserve. 75 cents. A piece of copper wire. A sergeant who refused to accept that the problem couldn't be solved. 2,000 Marines who came home because of it. That's the story of Mitchell Townsend. And it's a story worth remembering, not just for what it tells us about the past, but for what it demands of us in the present. If you found this story as powerful as I did, if you believe that contributions like Mitchell Townsend's deserve to be remembered and celebrated, then I need you to do something for me. Share this. Make sure his name doesn't disappear again. Make sure the next generation knows that sometimes the most important innovations come from the most unexpected places. So there you have it. If this kind of deep dive history is your thing, there's plenty more where this came from. Matter of fact, I've got another video. You can check that out next by clicking up here, and I'll catch you over there.